appreciate it greatly. Let me start by briefly introducing what this event is all about and who are we and why are we doing it. So this is a change event for part of our module. We are trying to change the perspective of how students see finance and the fact that I believe that students don't really do as well as they could if they had enough education. So let me start by introducing the team. There is Hannah over there. There is Faith over there. We are unfortunately missing one member, Tanya and Dominica. That's the first thing I wanted to do. The second thing I wanted to say is a little legal disclaimer that I have to do, which is that anything that's going to be said here today is not financial advice, so we can't be accountable for any decisions you make after whatever our speakers say. But let's move on from that. Let me just tell you why I believe this event is very important and my perspective on this whole thing. When I got to university, I was completely living off of my parents' money, and the first few months were crazy. I was spending for my life, and I honestly can't even tell you where the money went. I just don't know. Food, alcohol, yeah, probably those kind of things, but I don't have anything to show for it. I don't have anything that I can go like, this is what I bought with it. I don't. So when I realized this is an issue, I tried to kind of battle it myself. So last year I started investing. Great idea. I invested in Bitcoin, skyrocketed. I was super happy with myself. But as you can probably guess, I had no idea whatsoever what I was doing. So I started doing very silly decisions like, oh, I know this company, let's try it out. Or, oh, this is a nice name, they definitely have to do good with such a name. Or things like that. So then I lost much more money than I actually gave the Bitcoin, but that's not the important point. At that point, I realized that it's super important to have the education. It's super important to try and do it yourself. But without the background, you just don't know how. So in the beginning of this year, we joined a startup. We have the CEO of the startup right there. The startup is all about finance, how to make education, finance education free and accessible to everyone. I'm sure he's going to tell you a little bit more about that, and it's also future brokerage, but that's not important. So I kind of got into it. I kind of started understanding a little better, and I feel like this is something that everyone should know. I feel like it should be a subject in high school. My high school, I don't know about yours guys, but my high school did an extremely poor job in giving me any of these kind of information of how to do things, which is why, at least at university level, I, together with my team, we decided that it's a great idea to organize an event that can kind of strike your interest and give you the basic information or anything that you can get out of it, and it would be amazing. So there's one tiny little change of plan because we wanted to get an influencer from London, and unfortunately she got last minute COVID. However, no worries, we got someone much better. We have the same here. He is actually a university university student here at the university, which is great because he can give you the perspective of a student and how he got into investing. He also won the London Trading Academy last year, so he's clearly someone who can tell you a little bit more from the student perspective, which is great, and we very much appreciate it. Thank you very much. So let me start by giving the floor to him. So he's gonna tell you about his experience and anything like that. Please, throughout, anyone who is speaking or anything, ask as many questions as you can. I believe both of the speakers would be very happy with questions, and they are very happy to answer anything, and even shift what they are talking about towards maybe what you guys are interested in, because after all, that's why are we here. Thank you.
So basically, hi, my name is Hussein. I just finished up PP here, and now I'm doing a master's here in economics. So I started doing, well, once again, I'll just say things. None of this is like anything actual, like, finance advice. No, just take it all with like pinch of salt. I'm more talking from the perspective of how I found it as a student, learning and getting into it and balancing it out, and what like my biggest flaws were, because there were a lot, and how I managed to make a bit of money, but nothing like write home about. That's it really. Now, as a student, when you're coming into the world of trading, especially in this day and age, you hear a lot of things like influencers, things like advertisements on YouTube videos, whatever, all these things which oh yeah, we're going to make money. Like, oh yeah, follow this like insane strategy, which no one's ever heard about, making money, like pay for scheme or something. Um, I looked into a bunch and I couldn't find any which would, to me, seem like, oh yeah, this is something I can follow. Like follow someone and going through like debate, going back to the basics and stuff like what were people's mistakes when it came to approaching trading, what were people's good, I guess, tactics when approaching it, and then it always came back down to, oh yeah, look at the basics, look at the control yourself mainly, and information. So basically controlling yourself, information and the basics. So when it came to the basics, the resource which I found was quite good was a book called The Intelligent Investor. That was quite pretty standard. Really recommend that one. And then also just talking to your lectures actually, because your lecturers would, well, if you finance or any of particularly John Levy's modules, he has an insane understanding of like how the lecturers. So just talk to them, see what they think, talk to them about different companies, and look into the news right there. And those are all things I'm sure you guys will be doing or attempting to do. But then look into not only what the news is doing, but also things like Twitter, for example. Because that might seem a bit of a weird one, but people are actually making money off of looking at what Donald Trump and Elon Musk's tweeting times were in a day. So someone, I had a story about someone creating a spreadsheet of all their different tweet times and like whether or not they were positive or negative or whatever. And then they were just waiting for those particular times to like buy or sell in the markets because then they'd be expecting it to come out like that. And then I had another thing about some funds looking up where airlines, which paths airlines were taking to certain countries, or like where, sorry, explain that one point, where people, high level officials in banks and whatnot, or different companies, were taking their things to public information. So they were looking at, oh yeah, they went here, who are they talking to there, okay, do this, do that. And they just created a big spreadsheet and then they're like, oh crap, this might be a new deal coming up here. And then they just got that. So there are like lots of weird ways you can get information. But then there are also the common ways to like news. So does anyone know what the inflation rate of banking, like what the England's inflation rate was today? Pardon? Yeah, 4.2%. But pretty sure it was 4.2. And then I think it was above the 3.9% which they were being predicted to get. And the Bank of England have now said that they're expecting it to hit 5% by the end of December. So something like that, for example, is a pretty big deal. And you need to like keep on top of that during the studies and stuff. But obviously that's a lot of information to keep in mind. Like, oh, what can't take this as a fix. So I think you've got to hit all the important stuff first. But a good way to keep on top of that is those are I think it's called forexcalendar.com/calendar. But that sort of stuff, it literally does it for you. Like it will literally just tell you, oh yeah, on this day there's this coming out. Look ahead to it. Some different even YouTube channels like Amplify Tradings. Yeah, I think it's literally just called Amplify Trading. They've got a platform called Amplify.me. They will literally do a breakdown every single morning for you of what the news was, what this means for markets and everything. Like you don't even have to be looking into it yourself and try to figure out yourself necessarily. You could even be taking resources such as that and like when you're just like something in the morning, it can literally just play for you in the background, just like, oh yeah, this is what's going on, this is what this is what that is, and you've got all your news for the day. But then there are things which come a bit unexpected. So, like you mentioned before about how certain companies, oh yeah, this is a company, this is a company, sort of thing like this is really relevant. For example, the Uber IPO. I don't know how familiar you guys are with IPOs, but that's like when a company is originally coming to the market and it's just like, ah, this is the share price and you buy it and shit it. Uber is the name we all know, and everyone thought, well, like as a brand name, people would be like, oh, that's just fair enough. As soon as it came out, it got shorted like hell because if you look at the balance sheets and stuff, it was not making any money. It was like terrible. So learning things when it comes to the basics learning how to do things like balance sheets, learning how to do things like trend lines, learning how to do things like candlesticks. They all sound like they're really not like it might seem fancy on the screen and whatnot. It's just like in my opinion not that big of a thing, and I suck in maths. So like if I can do it, other people can. But yeah, no. I think what's the is there anything in particular that you guys? Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention. Oh, yeah, sorry.
You said you sort of from my understanding, created spreadsheets and trend
Oh,
lines yourself.
personally, oh yeah, when it comes to doing trend lines and stuff, yeah, I do that. So,
And then, so my question is, where do you specifically get the information to make the trend line, and then what exactly are you looking for as a key indicator of what's going on?
okay, so this is once again my own personal thing. Please look into yourself and everything as well, and like, look to actual professionals and stuff like that. But from what I did originally when I first started, when I did the London Trading Academy one, um, so London Trading Academy, it was a switch over. Days, sorry, the competition over a couple of days began with us going through like a 3 hour course on ad basics and trading. And when it came to trend lines, it was pretty simple. We kind of just did like lines from like the bottom of the graph, I guess, to the top, and just sort of like, and then from the top of the curve, and then we just sort of like, oh yeah, that was a that's kind of the trajectory it's going on currently. But I personally was doing, I go back and I do 7 days, I just create a graph, or and then I do 7 days worth of time, and then I do 5 days worth of time, then I do another couple lines, then I do 3 days, and I do 3 days up, and I do 2 days, 1 day, and then I go by an hour, and then by like I do 30 minutes, 10 minutes, and then I know it's a lot of lines on the graph, but I mean each one is going to be different as possible, and then once I zoom out, whatever, I can see, in my opinion, what was more of an accurate prediction for like the current day. And then what I do then is I read the news about it, so I go into like Forex Town, I mentioned before, or like I go into any of the general news like Financial Times or Yahoo, whatever, and I just read as much as I could. Oh, is there anything that's going to change any of these coming out soon? Oh, is there anything that like check their Twitter? Oh, is any of their employees coming up regarding the company which isn't listed on anything else right now? Just read as much as I can, and if I couldn't find anything, I'd be like, okay, cool. Well, I'm expecting to see the current trajectory that I've plotted out through all these numerous lines, and then I check it on there. Now, it's not foolproof, but it can be a pretty good indicator. And also, if you've got, in my opinion, if you've got nothing else that's going to put you away from the current trajectory, then I don't really see why it's going to change, to be honest. But then, obviously, sometimes it takes a bit of sealing. It might take a lot to break through it, like the resistance, but then if it will break through it, then it can hit some support. So I think, if I could be wrong on this, but I think the general rule of thumb is if it hits the line 3 times, I think it's breakthrough. I could be wrong on that, but yeah, something along those lines. If it breaks through, then it can potentially become support. But then offset, if it keeps on going support, it could then also become like a new resistance line. Hopefully that made any form of sense, but. Is that oh yeah no sorry when it comes to controlling your emotions, so how many of you would say that you're an emotional person? Okay. Have you ever done anything like gambling or anything like that? Okay, now when you lose, do you think about it a lot after that? So that is something which messes a lot of people up, because I've seen so many times where people like put in they'll buy a share or something and then start going no, sorry, the short share will start going up, and then like, oh, I need to buy in, but I'll buy it and it'll start going down, and I'll do the opposite again, and then it just gets caught into like this little cycle, and you think, oh yeah, it's great. Like as soon as I press it, oh, it's just going to go up and down. But it's more a case of you need to not only think short term, but think also like as soon as it happens, it's going to be like wow, I bought Bitcoin, it's going to like my life's changed. It might not necessarily happen immediately, or it might not happen at all. But like, you need to realize when you're putting that money in, you're a genuine risk, and as uni students, you might not have the money to do it. Like personally, I don't come from a very privileged background. I don't have a lot of money. What I did originally was the money I did have, I set like I think it was a 5%. I think I set a risk limit. So as soon as it drops below 5% of whatever I put in, which probably not actually, like it was some 5% originally, and I upped it to 10%. And I know that's like so some go the opposite way, like oh yeah, what happens like stable, some goes up then, but I just didn't feel like the risk of it was worthwhile me potentially losing out on all that money, which I couldn't afford to spend at the time. So please don't put every single penny in and then like lose it and then be surprised like by the end of it. Like most people, you hear all these stories about people making a bunch of money. There's a lot more losses in my opinion than there are people who win. Please be realistic about it. Please don't like just make this everything. When it or no, yeah, please definitely don't do that. When it comes to also when you lose something, I've had people who will um, just go for a run and then they're fine. Some people don't care at all. Personally, I'm quite fortunate that I don't really dwell on things when it comes to that stuff. But I know people who do and then they'll get sloppy as opposed to that. If you're starting to do stuff, if you're starting to realize you're not following the rules you've set in place for yourself, and the steps you decide to take, this is what's working for me. There's no longer like, if you're straying away from that, you're increasingly likely to be doing so. Please do not go do that. Like just be as safe and as rational as you possibly can when approaching these things and constantly looking at information. But I highly, highly recommend that students enroll in courses when it comes to these things. Personally, I've done courses with like I was fortunate enough after running the trading academy, they gave me a free course to do along with them. That was really good. So I recommend things like that. I recommend things like amplified trading if you're doing anything, if you're looking to go into the financial field in general, anyway, because then you give you like simulators and whatnot, you can see how you fare against other students going into it or against like previous students. And you can test yourself against like real world simulations and like real world trading. So I really think that the best way to learn is to try your hand at it, and please use demo accounts originally. The platforms I found which were most student friendly would be IG and also eToro. eToro because it gives you the opportunity to see other people's trading and what sort of things that they're doing for. So you might actually be able to look into what they're doing and think, oh, what do they see that I'm having? What is it that's motivating them to put their money in that I haven't done? And then also you can see how people have performed throughout their portfolio over the last few years or something. So you yourself, oh yeah, what did they win out? What did they lose out? Oh, here we go. You can also, once you feel a bit more like confident in stuff, you can start doing more like technical trading things like moving averages and stuff like that, which I think Python and I don't know what other languages go into. But those sorts of things will trade for you automatically. Now that doesn't actually, in my opinion, beat human trading done by yourself, at least at this level. Because I've seen friends who made a very good one trade for him as soon as the average number of things are going up, or they buy in, if it's not going down, or it's sell, whatever. But even though he made, I think, like 1,400 or something, like the time he was running for the short time he was running, when he looked at the data afterwards, if he just stayed into the shares he bought in he would have made like an extra grand. So like, even though the system worked and kept him safe and everything, if you just like checked his information, stuck with his stuff for the first time out, he was actually involved. So if the information is there to back the stuff up, don't necessarily just pull out the podcast. Any questions regarding any of that? Yeah.
So the other speaker we have is already mentioned Allison Mahmood. He's the CEO of Bear, but I'm pretty sure he's going to tell you more about himself and the company by himself. So I don't want to kind of take this.
All right. Just give me one moment to swap it. Oh, did I stop your phone? Sorry. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to swap around the presentation since I was asked to have slides. So very reluctantly, I ended up making some. So let me move that here and then move the presentation over here. And somehow make it fit. One moment. It's always the technical difficulties in the presentation. So once we get going, it should be good. There, and let me just add it to the live stream since we are also live. Tab, slides, share, and then add it in like that. Perfect. All right, so we can navigate that. So as far as kind of the topic of what we're going to be talking about, it's a little bit of a mix. A little bit, it is the main focus, of course, is money matters. So it's quite a bit about finance, but also because of, what we do at FAIR is very centered on kind of impact and ESG investing. I also want to talk about kind of business in general, and also the considerations of impact and how to look at those sides. But to all the fun parts, I have one question just to kind of gauge what kind of level you guys are at in understanding. I've already kind of figured that there's a bit of a range, but how many of you have ever bought a share of anything in your life? All right, so most of you are quite new to this, so I'll make sure to also kind of cover some basics. Why is this not going to the next slide? Sorry. There we go. Can I just? There we go. Perfect. So just to get started, why should you listen to me? I could be, making stuff up and talking anything. So I'll get started off talking a little bit about who am I. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm the founder of FAIR. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at FAIR later. But I also wanted to kind of tell you how I got into the whole kind of trading and investing and finance side of things. And I realized investing in finance, so I'm just going to look for a marker.
We didn't timeline. We looked for 1 billion times.
Ah, I see. Okay. Well, in that case, I guess I'll fidget with my wallet while I talk. So essentially, how I got into it. The kind of first, when I first had an interest in finance, I actually started with a little bit before with my first interest in business. So when I was about 13, me and my parents were in Paris, and I ended up coming across this store, and there were these shorts that I really liked. But they told me you can only buy them in wholesale. So just because I was a little bit of an annoying kid, asked my parents to borrow a little bit of money, I bought a bunch, so I was actually about $1,000, and shipped them back to Czech Republic. With that, I then went around different boutique stores till I was able to offload all the ones that I brought to Czech Republic, and that kind of gave me my initial little bit of capital that I then was playing around with. And I was thinking, what do I do with this money? Because I was not used to having I don't even remember how much money it was, but it was a pretty decent amount of money for a 13-year-old. I was wondering, what do I do with this? Did I just put it in the bank? No, because when I actually went to make a bank account, they told me, oh no, you wouldn't be able to do stuff with your money. Like basically the law is ridiculous. It would have locked me out of moving around my own money, and I was like, no way, there's no way I'm going to agree to that. So I went around looking, to find some way I could have the money, because I'm not really going to just keep it as cash under my pillow, because while that is kind of a dreamy idea, I'm not sure it's very practical. Okay, so what I ended up kind of going into was looking around, and I kind of got interested in finance and stocks and actually investing. When I started, it was weird. I was very confused because I had some understanding of businesses themselves, but most of my experience with businesses wasn't with the massive companies that ended up being listed. So trying to look around, trying to understand balance sheets and all these things, I was very much lost. But with time, I kind of went on, learned a little bit, and then I got to a point where I felt pretty comfortable with it. And one thing that you probably know, since you've got to be knowing me, but all of you will know if you ever kind of are comfortable enough to say, yeah, I have a rough idea how to invest or trade. People always ask you the same question. Oh, can you teach me? So what this ended up happening for me, essentially, was when I started to feel comfortable enough to say, oh yeah, I know a bit, and then having a bunch of people kind of ask me, hey, can you teach me a little bit? Can you explain this? Things like that. And with that as the background, I then spent a lot of time kind of teaching people. Even now, I actually have a few people I'm teaching outside of FAIR, just because that's been going. So since I was about 14, 15, I've just been teaching different people bits about finance and trading and all that, just because there was the interest. It wasn't anything like professional. I didn't have any business. I just did it for free because I thought something useful. People should know this. And as such, what came about then is basically what we're doing at Fair. So I'll kind of move on to that, and then we can. Needs to be a clicker. I don't know why these classrooms don't have a clicker. It's annoying. So who is Fair? So we originally started. So actually, I'll tell you the story behind it. So originally, not the Fair, but we were working. It was the start of COVID, and we were talking about, let's just do something here because COVID's not going to go away in 2 months. Who would have thought that it would still be around, right? But it wasn't going to go away in 2 months, and we had the summer, couldn't travel. So the question was, what do we do? Do we waste this time and do nothing? Do we, how to fill the time? So me and a former acquaintance of mine ended up talking and came up with the idea, let's do a hedge fund, right? Seems ridiculous. What 20-year-old just starts a hedge fund? But on the other hand, we were like, we started looking into it, testing some things, figuring it out, and we found out if we had the money, there's no reason we couldn't. So we started working on that and working on it, and we were trying to think about how could we distinguish us? How can we do something different than a normal hedge fund so we can justify being these young people starting a hedge fund where the average manager of a hedge fund is 47 or something like that, maybe even older. So we were way too young for most people, so we were looking for some kind of distinction. And as we were doing that, we decided to kind of build tools for retail investors just so we can show off what we know. We're working on a tool around options to show different. So I'm actually not going to get into explaining that to most of you not familiar with that. But basically, we're building kind of a tool around some trading for retail investors. Now, retail investors are basically normal people, institutional are the big banks, hedge funds, and all that. But what we were doing is basically started playing around with things and doing a bit of teaching, building these tools. So that's what was fun for us. And then in January of this year, it's still this year, we're only in November, we had a discussion with somebody who basically said, what is wrong with you? Why are you spending so much time in this when you're building a hedge fund? Right? Because we were basically building a bunch of retail tools when we were building a hedge fund. It really didn't fit well together from those two sides. So that's how kind of the idea for Fair came around. We were so we had a discussion well, what do we actually enjoy the most? It was those tools, it was that education and those parts. So I personally, I've always been a big proponent of making sure providing financial education for free. I really don't like charging any money for it. So we were okay, so if we do that education, we do that for free, how do we cover it? Okay. So that's how basically what Fair is doing has come around. So kind of sum up what Fair is doing. There's two sides to the business. We have our education platform, and we're building out the brokerage. Now, on the education side, if you have trying to learn about finance, you probably kind of saw 3 different options out there. I'm not a big fan of either, but that's kind of lost me. So one of them are books. Books are amazing. There's tons of great books that explain a lot of stuff, things like that. There's one issue though. Well, actually 2 issues. A lot of people don't like to learn from books, but more importantly, it's not applied, right? You'll read up on the theory. Oh, this is what asset classes are. This is what unicorn options are, which are the most ridiculous thing ever. And you might learn, okay, this is what it is, but how do I use it? I don't know, right? So that's a big limitation of many books that I found are actually really good. They lack the applicability. Now, another option is something he mentioned, which is the YouTube videos, right? You have tons of stuff on YouTube and everywhere online. But if you go about 3 minutes into the average video on stock trading, you end up hearing, be sure to check out my course for $5,000 that teaches you this or that. And those courses, most of the time, absolute garbage. So not even worth your time, not even worth the whatever the charge, right? The thing is, if you do have the money to pay for those expensive courses, there is actually a valid option. A lot of banks have their own educational system. UBS has a really good intro course to trading. The issue is it's expensive. It's applied, which is great. It's like a 5-day course, beginner stuff, really well done. But how much do you think that intro course How much do you think that intro course costs? It's a 5-day thing, covers the absolute basics. Just any guess, just shout it out. 2.5K. You are about 3.5 times too low. $8,000 for a 5-day intro course. It's a great course, but it's ridiculously expensive. And that kind of is the issue in finance, I noticed, if you want to kind of get into a lot of training. You can get some great education for free, but it's not very applied, so you end up kind of struggling through it yourself, trying to figure out how do I use this. Or they're completely valid courses. They're ridiculously expensive. And of course, there's a ton of scams because, of course, it's finance. So for me, when I was kind of looking at that, it's very important that the education for finance is free. We all hear all the time, finance things like taxes and all this. We should learn that in school. Yeah, we should, but we don't. But because it's so necessary, I strongly think it just should be free. We're building an education platform alongside that brokerage, which is free. All the education on there free. We're not going to charge for anything, and it's applied to people actually get to learn for it. The other side of the business is we're building a brokerage around kind of ESG minded. I'll talk a little bit about ESG on that side of it later. I'm not here to really sell you fair, but I just wanted to kind of talk about it to give you, kind of background on me, or maybe why you shouldn't just be like, yeah, that guy's an idiot, I'm leaving. So maybe, take a bit of a word from it. Maybe, you could take me at my word at least a little bit. So what I wanted to talk about, because, I noticed a lot of you kind of didn't mention that you haven't even traded shares or anything before, so a lot of you are beginners. I wanted to really cover the 3 fundamental things I see in the market. Because, we can talk about technical analysis and candles and all these things, but I think it's very important to understand what actually is happening. Where am I doing this? What are these underlying things? Because there's a lot of different words in finance. Many times you'll kind of be like, oh, okay, I have a rough idea what this is, but I feel like market stocks and risk are so fundamental to it that it's really having a bit of a discussion about what they are and how they work is important. And one thing I do want to mention, at any time if you want, just raise your hand, ask questions, interrupt me. I really kind of prefer much more of a dynamic conversation back and forth, so I do want to just encourage you to do that. But let's talk about what a market is, right? So, of course, traditional markets, you're from the business school, so you know what a normal market is. But when we're talking about in the space of finance, what a market typically would be the exchanges. So that's where you go and buy the shares or options or whatever you're buying. Now, the way those work is a little bit different than a normal market. Because, if you think of, let's say you go to a farmer's market and you want to buy potatoes, there's going to be 20 different people selling them, and you have to pick, okay, which one is going to be the right one? Do I go to every single stall and go, hello, how much do your potatoes cost? Any chance those are cheaper? Right? That's very inconvenient. If you did that with stocks, you're trading millions and millions of dollars, or even billions sometimes, on a single transaction, that would be ridiculous, and there's constant back and forth. So the way an exchange works is it's essentially combined. So you said there's no markers, right? Damn it, I needed to draw. Okay, I guess I'll just use my hands. So the way you can think about it is an exchange is kind of the centralized place. And everyone that wants to buy will be like, hey, I want to buy these shares at this price, or these, whatever they want to buy, at whatever price they want to buy. They go to the exchange and say that. And the sellers go to the exchange and say, hey, I have this much and I want to sell it. And it's essentially the exchange is the one that processes this. Now, back in the day, if you remember, if you've seen many different movies where people are like, I'll sell Apple for $300, Apple $300, and exchanges and all these things that have, that's how it used to be. But most exchanges nowadays are not in person. Everything happens online. Like your phone is about as good as it gets for trading. Now, computers, a little bit of a bigger screen, maybe you can see the panels better, but essentially that's what everyone uses, right? It's just a phone, a laptop, whatever. Now, there's an exception, because as you mentioned, if you build it as some kind of an algo trading thing with Python, then it gets really interesting. You have to have like big, massive servers, super fast, and like the thing there is, just for a side note for anyone that's familiar, like a foot difference in the length of a cable there was one firm, and I think they extended their cable by a foot and a half, and that made sufficient difference from them going from having their algorithm work very well, making a bunch of money, to losing half their money within like 2 years. So the algo space is wild and crazy, and there's a lot going on there. But here, what I want to touch up that is a normal exchange, so that's where you probably get the interaction. So whenever there's exchanges, most of them, so I'm not stocks and things like that, what's going to be happening there? They're open during certain times. This is a super archaic, outdated thing, and I hate it. Why can't we just have exchanges open 24/7 like normal people? But basically, any exchange you trade on will be open from a certain time to a certain time. Like it's a really annoying exchange that they even have lunch breaks, which is ridiculous. I don't get it. Like who does this nowadays? But that's what happens. And probably most of you have heard of like NASDAQ or NYSE, so like the New York Stock Exchanges. But I'm just gonna grab a drink because I've been. But there's exchanges all over the world because the purpose of exchanges is essentially to provide money for businesses. Because when you think about it, why is a company publicly traded? Why wouldn't someone just keep the company themselves? Why would you give away, because they're giving away ownership when they list the company publicly. So why do that? Well, in certain cases, when it's like VCs or things like that, there it's because you have investors. In many cases, you have direct listings, you have companies that never had outside investors who are happy with the profits, go public. Go public, which is the benefit on the exchanges. So why would they do that? Well, getting listed on exchange is another way of raising money. Essentially, when a business, the motivation for a business to be like, I'm going to get listed on NYSE or the London Stock Exchange or the Kazakh Central something, I don't remember the exact name, but anyway, like every country in the world has an exchange, even North Korea. It's weird, it's very restricted, it's not accessible to outsiders, but apparently they do. It's kind of interesting. So the reason they exist is so people can put in money into the business. Because let's say you're looking for a global expansion. You want to take your business and you want to enter the Asian market. Well, you can either save. And then once you save up $400 million, you can go expand. But that's a bit slow. And $400 million, or even for some things that they're doing, it could be $2 billion or even more. Like it's tons of money that a lot of these things start to cost. And a bank might not always lend it to you, or sometimes you don't even want to borrow it from a bank because if you borrow it from a bank, you have to pay the money back. If you list it, you won't pay back. You just give them a cut of the shares, and that's it. That's what you're exchanging. Those businesses, fundamentally, what they're doing by being listed on the exchanges, they're raising money. And that's why it's important to them. Because they're giving away control. As owner of the business, you give up control in exchange for that money. And that leads us to stocks. Because essentially, what they do is they trade the stock for the money. But what is a stock, right? Stock is equity in the company. The answer, most of these are probably business school students. I don't have to kind of go into exactly, what shares come with, but you have voting rights. You have essentially control over the company to some extent. To some extent, you own everything the company owns, a small part of it. And to some extent, you also get some profits. Now, not all companies, not all stocks pay dividends. There's actually quite an interesting view on it, where some people will heavily buy stocks which pay dividends, and then they'll use the dividends as their profits. Some people don't care about the dividends because they're looking for the growth of the underlying business. There's a lot of kind of dynamics there, which, where what people really care about. So that's just kind of an interesting thing. If you're looking at a stock, you're going to go buy someone, look at their dividends. It's a good thing to do. Some won't pay any. Some will pay a lot. It's called I don't remember. But anyway, there's a lot of range there, and it's good to be aware of because if the dividend date is next week, it will affect the stock price, and everything affects the stock price. Literally, everything affects the stock price. And just to kind of go to an extent of how far something can affect the stock price, it doesn't even have to be something that happens in the industry. What you could have is, let's say, in Germany, car manufacturing is really good. So a lot of people are, like, let's say people are going to pour more money into those German businesses which are making cars. The thing is, money is limited. So in order to get the money to invest into the German ones, they're going to have to sell somewhere else. So they're going to liquidate some of their positions. So even if one industry is doing better, there's a tie there of some other industries who actually do worse, just because the people need to move around money. So the smallest things always affect the stock price. Now, when it comes to why own a share of the company outside that, it might be worth more. Because it might be worth more is essentially like saying, hey, this is, I value this today at $10, and tomorrow you want to pay me $100, but I'm just giving you underlying value in it, like it's probably worth like 20 pence or something. So it's very much kind of just a bargaining. But the reason why we don't look at them like, hey, what's something worthless? Ooh, NFTs, very fun. The reason we don't, because NFTs, that's something that they'll basically say like, I think this is worth that because I like that. It's very speculation driven. But stocks themselves have some kind of an underlying value, which is very important because a lot of people, let's say when Hertz was going into bankruptcy, and a lot of people, like the Wall Street bets, like, everyone bought it. Well, that was crazy. It definitely wasn't worth that much. But the thing is, it wasn't worth nothing. The business owned cars, the business owned location, the business owned tons of different things. So at the end of the day, even when a company goes bankrupt, the shares shouldn't be worthless. If you remember Lehman Brothers, right? The shares are still traded. The business doesn't exist. You can still buy shares of Lehman Brothers. Still exist. They're still listed on the exchange. So things like this, there is an underlying value. It's not just a piece of paper. But all of this, right? We talk about Lehman Brothers or Hertz and all these, comes with risk. I think that's the most important thing to think about when trading and doing anything. It applies in life, it applies in trading, it applies at university, it applies everywhere. Right? Thinking about risk is something, as people, we're inherently very, very bad at. We suck at thinking about risk. Like Sarah was very nervous that nobody would come to this. There'd be no one here. And the thing is, that's, was that a really likely risk? Probably no. At least one or two people would come here. So it's probably going to be fine. But our minds are stupid. They suck at understanding this. That's why if you have a bad day and you just, sold something at a loss, it will affect you. Because you don't understand the actual quantity of the risk involved. There's a whole field of economics and finance and all this called behavioral economics or behavioral finance. Their whole job is understanding why we're so stupid at working with risk. Essentially, right? There's a lot more to it. Essentially, it's just why are we so fucking stupid when it comes to risk? Like when you pick your university, you chose Exeter. Why? But if you were like, this is a university I'll probably take. Maybe some of you could have gone to, I don't know, Harvard or something, right? But you never applied because you were worried about it. This is the issue. And when it comes to finance, we have to be diligent with this. We can't make the human error. We have to find a way to understand this is the number, this is how we measure it, and even then do we start to have some mistakes in it. But in finance, it's very important to understand your risk correctly, to manage your risk correctly. Like the thing is, an example, just to kind of give you an example. There was a time when I was trading horribly. Like 95% of the trades I made lost me. But because I was very, very careful with actually managing risk, I actually ended up positive. those 5% trades, 5% of the trades that end up making you money were enough to cover all the loss. That's just risk management. That's all it is. And that's why I think personally, I think it's the most important thing. And when a hedge fund goes around and does some crazy trades, it's the first thing they think about. It's risk. As a business, when you expand globally, it's the first thing you consider, risk. When you go out in the morning and grab a coffee on the way, and you're like, oh, okay, I might be a little late to the lecture, considering the risk. It's present everywhere. I think it's the most important thing. It's actually both the most important thing you can bring to finance, but it's also, I think, the most important thing you can take away. If you get into trading, you get into stocks, you get into any of this, the biggest value you can take away from it, even if you make no money, you lose all the money. I think learning to really understand and play with risk in a better way is the biggest value that you can find to you outside the money. But even within it, risk, I think, is kind of the most important thing. And we can definitely talk a little bit more about risk as we go on.
Great.
Exactly.
Amazing. As you probably know, we are all students, so we are very likely to be budget limited.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you start investing? How would you take your very limited budget and start get into investing in the first place with the very limited budget?
So I think there, it depends on the background. So are we talking including learning, or are we talking purely
Including learning.
just by books? And then, so when we talk about limited budgets, because the thing is, I think the best way to start is by paper trading, right? So you're kind of messing around, trying stuff, so you can understand the applied part. If that's what you're going to do, then the best option that's currently out there would be buying a bunch of books. Now, I would love to tell you, go use the fair platform. If you want, that's great. But not everyone's going to want to do this. I think we haven't, we're going to be launching soon. So that's the stage. Go check it out. I think it'll be quite helpful. I'm going to keep adding stuff. But without considering what we're doing, this side will give you a very biased answer. I would say a bunch of books. Just go into Google and be like, finance books, best books to learn investing. And be very careful, because a lot of those will be really shitty scams. But whenever it's a book that's on Amazon, and you can buy the physical copy, and it has more than 500 reviews, probably solid. You can kind of look at that. But there's one book which is really great, but you can't buy it because, first of all, it costs $2,000 now because they took it out of production. But also because it's kind of even annoying to try to get, even if you have the money for it. But you can just get a PDF of it online. I'm sure all of you know how to do that. It's called Margin and Risk or something like that. It's this blue book, really thick one. It's considered one of the best books in finance. It really focuses on risk quite well. I think that's a really good learning point. I wouldn't start with that. What I would start with, as part of the books, is probably something like, I'm going to need to take, can't take my phone. Okay. Well, there's this one book that's essentially focused on following a few traders and kind of talking to them. I don't remember what they're called. Yeah, I have a horrible memory for books, as you can tell. So I'll just describe the book and hopefully you can find it. It's pretty, they're one of the most popular ones. But essentially, it's basically documenting discussion, market wisdom. Yeah, so it documents some discussions with some traders and investors about how they thought about it. If I was starting right now, I would start with that. And as I read through it, any word I don't know, Google it, look it up. Investopedia is a good source. Any other sources, just type it into Google, you can find stuff there. From there, you kind of have a foundation of all the things around that exist. So then you can start to be a little thinking. I personally, big focus on risk. I would heavily focus on risk. Some margin of risk or something like that would be a great book. But but there's a lot of kind of variety you can kind of branch off to. Yeah, I'm sorry, I suck at remembering books. But if all of you are interested, I'll make a post on a LinkedIn or something, just so I can write it out. Because I have it written down somewhere on my laptop. But yeah, my memory for names is not
Okay, let's say that we went through the books, we are somewhat confident. What would be the next step?
paper trade. Spend 6 months basically paper trading. So what paper trading is it's like a lot of brokers do this. Is essentially you can open up an account there where you're not paying with real money. Yeah, essentially you kind of fake money you can learn to trade with. That you can learn to trade with and kind of mess are not applied. You can supplement that and just messing around with trading, I think is the best. One of the issues though that a lot of people make is that when they paper trade, it's fake money. So they don't really worry about it. And that oh, I just fuck up the trade and then you fuck up. That's it. So take that as, you know, take some out of there. A lot of money for me, but I can afford to lose it and put it like somewhere at home. And if you're trading doing very bad and you're losing, start and put it in some big friend. You just put it aside somewhere with not a lot of money, just so you can see the actual money going on. And maybe if you look, you can back that. But trying to think of as much as you can, what's his actual money, try to put that from you. I think is the great thing that actually a friend of mine did is they set us so they were okay, 400 quid is the most amount of money I can afford to lose. Kind of set that aside, and as they were paper trading, they donated it to charity. So that way, positive, but also in the market, but also there is that bit of a I lost a bit of money. I don't like that. And that would you can get at least a bit of the feeling. Once you're been paper trading for 5 months, you're quite comfortable, and you can start to real money.
Something like the IG trading platform for their demo accounts, do you happen to know of any companies you have that functionality for?
Yeah, so the best broker generally that I quite like is called Interactive Brokers. They have the best offerings, really good execution systems, everything. They have a great solution. So if you want something super simple and you're in the UK, Saxo Bank does it. I wouldn't use Saxo Bank as an actual broker, but for paper trading, it's fine. Same with eToro. I would really not use execution is kind of crap, but there is as long as they have one execution.
Go around.
All right. So
And what are
all right. So trading is probably different. You're trading, sometimes you're investing. Just to make some, a lot of essentially you're looking at and you have just the trade, the trade like this on Tuesday. That looking at like uh, let's say Nike, right? You look at Nike, you really like where this brand is heading. I have a lot of confidence in their plans for long term. So now, and you look at this is what I'm going to do. This business is doing the right thing. their financials make sense, all this makes sense. I think the growth or you would buy when it comes to trading, they're cycle for a lot. Typically, they're looking for the opportunity. So that you know that seems to be quite exciting. You would buy them and wait for the week because you have expectations that they'll go back up in their share. So you're not going to have like one specific. These are the stocks that I put together. You're going to have asset classes you know. So you might know technology, you might know the automotive industry, you might know pharmaceuticals, you might know some sector. And in those, you're going to focus on all this is there. But you're not going to be like these are the 10 companies I'm going to trade because that would be very restrictive. With investing, because it's long term, you're kind of looking to keep it around. You're going to hold these for 5, 10 years, maybe shorter. Maybe you might change your mind. Usually, it's a very long term thing. But some people invest and then keep the same investments for 30, 40 years. It's very long term. It's kind of like a marriage in a way, right? So you're really looking for a business that will kind of fit well within everything else. There's a lot of factors, and I'm not going to be able to explain all different parts of making a good portfolio. Yeah.
What key things you look for in this thing that you
For me, it depends a lot. So I generally, when it comes to kind of investing, I try to look at how it fits in with the rest of the shares I'm invested in. So let's say I was looking at Apple, I look at how correlated it is to Samsung, how correlated is it to CZ Group, how correlated is it to all the other kind of shares, just so I know that if these few stocks in a portfolio crash, then the rest of my portfolio isn't going to crash either. So I try to kind of diversify, spread the risk, and then it can kind of depend on the individual businesses. If they're a good fit from the risk perspective, then whether I take one business or another, then it kind of starts to depend on well they're actually working on a new silicon chip, which would actually change the manufacturing process and could potentially do this or that. That could be a reason. Another reason is I know the CEO and that guy has a lot of potential as far as the way they're heading. So that might be. So at that point, it can start to be small things because when you start, a lot of companies are pretty solid financials, pretty solid things. So when constructing a long-term portfolio, it's very important how does it fit with everything else, and then small reasons for why you pick that company over another. So that's basically the way I look at it. Yeah.
So oftentimes I hear that you can start with Forex and anything else. Personally, that's how I started. Would you recommend that street to get into right now? Is that the street?
100%. Forex is heavily traded by computers. You have to be on a lot of leverage. And while yes, looking at the macroeconomic perspective can be quite helpful, government policies are very differently regulated than companies, right? Like if tomorrow I speak to some senator from the U.S., they tell me they're planning a new bill, and based on that, I can go buy, dollars, or I can go buy whatever currency I want and make money. There's no one that's going to stop me with insider information. So Forex is a very uneven market, and if currencies are what you really know and you want to kind of focus on that, then go for it. But it's the place where there's the least opportunity. It's the most punishing, and you have to do massive amounts of leverage. Right? So for anyone that doesn't know what leverage is, it's essentially borrowing money so you can trade more. So if someone says, I have 5 times leverage, that means that for every $100 that they put out of pocket, they borrow another $400 and invest with that as well. Which means they take on a lot of extra risk. Now with Forex, where it moves by basically nothing, the changes are cents. They even open across the day, 10 cents, 20 cents. So you need to buy tons and tons of the given currency to really make any noticeable amount of money. And especially, with a stock, if you have dumb luck, you can make, like you can buy some derivative and you can make like 20, 30, 40% of the day. If you're in Forex, you make like 1%. So there, people like use leverage to actually make actually match whatever the perfect scenario performance. Right? Realistically, you're not going to make 20, 40, whatever I said, or you're not going to make 1%. But what I'm trying to highlight is the volatility. It's basically how much the price moves. For the shares, if you remember those screens on SEO on TV, there's this big block and a lot of it is red and a bit of it is green, or a lot of it is green and things are red. That basically shows the performance of different stocks. And usually the percentage is there, how much it changed by, like 5, 6%, 2% in some cases. There's some that did really well, 12%, that really bad would be 11% or something like that. So the price moves a lot. When it comes to Forex, you have a lot of interference from central banks and all these things. They just get in the way. It's not volatile enough. It's not interesting enough. There's too much interference against, what might be going on. So I just really wouldn't recommend Forex unless you're like really going algo trading and you know exactly what you're doing and you have access to a policymaker and stuff like that.
I know last year that a lot of people either loved or hated it because of how volatile the market was, especially with like Trump tweeting and things like that. Do you think this year is more like this coming year is a bit more of a stable year in your opinion for people to begin entering the market, or
So I think the time you enter the market, like to learn, I wouldn't say matters that much. I think a more volatile market will teach you to trade with more volatility. So it's like you're a little bit battle ready, you could say. But essentially, if you understand the risk well, you kind of learn how to properly work with it, then it doesn't matter if there's tons of volatility or not. So I would say, if you're really worried you're going to make a mistake or something like that, yeah, less volatility can help. Generally, like a market that's overall growing is helpful. That will help you, probably do a little bit better because when you because on average, if the whole market is growing, and if most of the stocks you buy, you probably end up making money because the entire market is moving. So yes, that can be super helpful. But I think people who get into the market during a recession, they're used to okay, I need to sell because the whole market's going down, so they get used to selling a lot. So it's important to understand why what's happening is happening. And I think the best way to kind of look at how are you actually doing is compare it to how the market is doing. So pick some index you like, FTSE 100 or SPY or an S&P 500 or whatever index you like, based on what sectors you're trading, and compare your performance to how the index is performing, because that will actually tell you how you're doing. Not because if you're just like if the whole index is going down and you're making a lot of money, then very well. If the entire market is growing and you're buying shares, you're probably going to grow with it. But if you overperform it, you did better. If you underperform it, you did worse. Most people underperform the market.
I know that you're relatively young yourself, you know each other. Can you maybe tell us whether investing helps you financially or handle your money even outside maybe investing within your personal student life?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's what I talked about with risk. It applies everywhere. One of the things that because I had a background with businesses and things like that, I often looked at I was like, oh, well, we should invest into this and we should invest into that. Now this isn't stock market investing, but let's say invest into a bit more marketing or invest into renovating this shop or whatever, right? Think about it that way, and it would be like you would look at the numbers and kind of make sense. But I would always be like, what, this is the next step that will help grow. I would look at, I would much more commonly just take the extra risk. But then, kind of as I was trading, more kind of came to think about risk more on the monetary side, and much more with just the numbers. I then kind of got used to doing the same in business as well. It also helps on another side. I think this is something that is very applicable to students generally, which is a lot of people, you like think about career risk, right? A lot of you probably want to go work at some big company or stuff like that. And then some of you may be considering starting your own business. Some of you may want to go work for a startup, all these things, right? And oftentimes when people talk about, building a startup, that's super risky. Why are you doing this? Well, you're basically funny, right? Like you have so much time, it doesn't matter. Because one of the big things with risk is that the longer you have, the less risky it is. Or if in some cases it can be more. Like let's say if you take a career risk, the longer term of an outlook you have, less it matters. You probably heard like from the teachers, someone talk about that. Within our generation, most people will have 3 to 4 different careers that they go through. That means that even if you spend the next 10 years, I don't know, like working at a startup that ultimately fails, or starting your own business that ultimately goes bankrupt, still got two more careers to go. If you're 35, you can go do something. It's like one of the things that I notice a lot of people I talk to is a lot of people are worried. What if this happens? What if I don't get a job here? What if I do get a job there? There's so much time. Like the time horizon is so long. That risk is very negligible. Think about this, right? I had a job offer from Deloitte. I could have gone there, or I had the startup, and they made it into a situation where I had to go. Now, when I was thinking about it, yeah, one hand Deloitte, big consulting firm. Why not? I think I would have ran a team there. Actually, would have had a really good position. So it would have been great for someone who's 21. But then I was kind of looking at it, how, yeah, I would have kind of jumped a little bit ahead and kind of the learning part of it. But at the end of the day, by having my own startup, I'll learn a bunch more. And if it works well, that's great. And if it doesn't work well, fair. Like if it works well, then let's say it still exists and is operating in 5 years. That's what I would consider it working well. And then as we go, then we'll also learn stuff. But it still exists in 5 years and is funded and everything. And if I ever want to go back and work for Deloitte or whoever, I can get much further along, like a much better position. Or even let's say you join a startup, right? One of the things that I recently spoke to a lot of people too about is the career progression at a startup is massively different. I have a friend of mine who works at a startup in London. She started there at the age of 22 on the sales team. So, normal role, right? Nothing special. Within 1.5 years, she's now running the entire sales division for the company. And that's just what startups do, right? You take more risk. You start your own business. You're basically the CEO, right? Like, why did Sarah introduce me as the CEO? I started my own business. There's nobody who can disagree with me with my titles, right?
I sometimes disagree.
You disagree?
Sometimes.
All right. Well, actually, never mind. So the one person in our company who could fire me, so I'm not going to complain. But anyway, like you can do these things that are seemingly ridiculous, seemingly super risky, because you've got so long. It doesn't matter. Right? Like who cares if you go work for a startup or you go start your own business, which I think a lot more people should do. You fail. In 3 years, you fail. You have no money. You've got your education, you've got your startup, and probably taught you something. But let's assume it taught you nothing. Spend those 3 years running a business and you learn zero. You can still get a job somewhere. And yeah, you might be 3 years older, but when you're 60, who cares about 3 more years to get to some promotion? Like it's very negligible. So a lot of these things, like I think a lot more people, like the biggest thing for me, like particularly for finance, is even in personal life, just taking way more risk because we greatly underestimate how much risk we can actually have.
When you're placing your trades or when you're investing, do you have a specific number you have to set your risk to? So like every month or something as well?
So yes and no. When I invest, I don't really take that part because I'm like, okay, this is a long-term investment. I'm not going to set a stop loss here because this is a 10-year thing. What if within like 2 years, like almost it's the stop loss and it cashes out? I'm not going to do that. For trading though, yeah, absolutely. Um, I generally don't like to risk more than 5% of the entire portfolio. So let's say $100,000 account, right? If I make a trade for $20,000, then 5% of $100,000 is the maximum expenditure. But there are cases where I don't do this. You remember when oil prices went negative? Actually bought one. Well, got paid to bring a bunch. It ended up being above zero. Actually, ended up making quite a bit of money from that. But there are exceptions where I'm like, this is so ridiculous, I'm going to do something dumb. But that's where I like, before the trade, decide, okay, there's something I'm doing, and I'm taking more risk than normal, and then I'll do it. What I really don't recommend doing is starting a trade and being like, okay, this is the max risk I'll take, and then changing your mind halfway through. Sometimes it will work. Sometimes it will be great. On average, it usually ends up being much worse. So don't prepare the plan at the start, and unless you have, unless it's Tesla and suddenly Elon Musk tweets, I'm shutting down Tesla, we're liquidating everything, right? Then you can change your risk approach. But unless there's big news or some very significant reason why you should change your risk appetite towards that trade, don't change it once you're in. At worst, close the trade and start a new one with a new plan. That's sure. Still a bit, still kind of, you seem like you're chasing it, can start to be a problem when you're just chasing and chasing and chasing and lose a lot of money in a row. But it's still way better than changing your mind halfway through the trade. Because you should always kind of enter with a plan and try to stick with it.
So just to start back, what entry and actually got like what's the goal? Just to reiterate, so basically what I'm trying to say is that to get your basic knowledge and your basic information, you have to really trends, the books that you recommended, and look at the books you recommended and stuff like that. And then to start with, you should start with paper trading, which is basically one person is just kind of teaching you like what to do in the market, like what to look for to kind of like educate yourself. And then once you do that, the main one that's going to use, I think, is you said that you don't recommend forex trading, which is the main ones advertised on like Instagram, Snapchat, the one that we like adverts and stuff. It's always forex trading, but you said you don't recommend that.
Yeah.
So just to confirm, what I'm saying is correct. And then second of all, what did you say you recommend if you were starting with or a mobile app or something you could actually start trading with? Because I missed that bit when I went to
Yeah, so I would say as far as the app to start with, I like interactive brokers. They have a pretty good paper trade thing, but they're very complicated to start with because their whole interfaces are very pain. So if you're in the UK, Saxo Bank has a pretty decent paper trading interface. eToro, again, pretty decent paper trading interface. But what I wouldn't do is use eToro or Saxo Bank as your actual broker once you're trading real money. They're great for paper trading because they're quite simple to use, but they're really crappy brokers.
Because I personally use IG for them.
I never use
Oh,
IG.
they're actually, I'll actually go with them.
Fine. And then when you were kind of asking as far as what class, I would say as far as asset classes, it's kind of what you know. Like if you're someone who's super into crypto, there's no reason you can't start with trading. If you're someone who's super into currencies and all that, then for those few people who are like that, forex can be a good start. But I would generally, for kind of the average person, I'd recommend stocks. Pick the asset class you know best. So like, what are you interested in outside of kind of business? Is it hotels, cars, technology? What sector are you interested in?
fitness and technology because that's basically the future. So I feel like that would be the most decision to go into. But as for trading, or as for investment, I'm into property. So that's investment. But as for trading, the one I highlight would be technology.
But I think like outside of investing, right? So what interests you? Not like when it comes to investing or that. What are your interests outside of this? What is some area that you feel like you know very well is your hobbies, you're interested in?
I have to say, I like cars a bit. I like fashion.
Cars and fashion. There's tons of companies. The thing is, what? Yeah, no, but like cars and fashion, there's tons of businesses in those sectors. And I think the reason why I recommend picking a sector you kind of have a hobby in or are already interested in is because it's much easier to keep reading about. Like if you give me some pharmaceutical report, I will die before I get through one of it because I just don't care. It's, what, who knows? Give me some report about like plasma reactors and put it in the stupidest language possible. I'll still read through it because it really interests me. So that's why I'm saying, like, don't pick technology or that or that. Pick what you care about outside of it. So if you like automotive and fashion, pick your sectors to be automotive and fashion.
So apart from the you gave like two apps or websites that were Saxo Banco and the paper trading. But if I actually wanted to go into stocks, which apps would you actually or websites would you actually recommend that I would start stocks on?
Mhm. So to actually trade, so as a broker, once you don't take a trade, I really like interactive brokers. I'll always be recommending that. Now, again, if you're from the UK, so you have a residency here or a passport, free trade is actually decent. There's some issues there as far as like actually trading with them. But if you're looking to invest or only trade by buying stocks, then free trade is decent. And then outside of that, the market in Europe doesn't really have that many great options. It's not the US where I can tell you 10 different ones that I know that are really good. That's actually why with fair with other brokerage in Europe because there aren't that many great options. But I think free trade, if you want something simple to use and you're just looking to invest, or kind of only buy stocks when you're trading as opposed to shorting or anything like that, or derivatives and things like that. Or if you are looking to have what I would call a little bit more fun with it, then I would say interactive brokers is probably the best bet. Or anything like say G, so maybe IG, I've never used them. So I don't know.
So you said shorting.
Okay, so shorting is okay. So let's say that I think iPhones will start to cost a lot less money. I'll go to Sarah, but can I borrow your iPhone? Thank you. And then I sign some contract. I'll pay her some percentage for borrowing your iPhone. And I'll go up to him and be like, "You want an iPhone, right? Well, there it is." And I sell it to him whatever the current price is. And like 3 months later, I'm like, "Okay, iPhones have gone down in price. So I'll go buy the iPhone for a lower amount of money than I sold it to him for. I'll return it to Sarah with some additional. But essentially, you borrow the shares from someone, and then you sell them on the market. Yeah,
Why would you say I was doing something?
because maybe her outlook is different, right? So let's say I'm looking to do a trade that takes me 2 weeks. I'm looking to do a 2-week trade. Maybe Sarah is looking to invest in time, and her outlook is 20 years. So she doesn't care about something that happens in 2 weeks because compared to her 20-year outlook, it's insignificant. She's not going to bother doing all these other things. She has a bunch of other stuff to do. For me, I'm looking at just a short-term 2-week trade, so I might choose to do it. Or maybe Sarah might disagree with me. Sarah might think that they'll continue to go up during those 2 weeks. But she's like, why not make a little bit of extra money? Because I paid her interest in exchange for borrowing that iPhone. So she's going to pay extra money on top of already having an iPhone. So in case I am right, she at least makes a little bit of money from it as compared to losing money. Yep.
What do you recommend people do? Okay, so do you have some of the landline things which don't really make sense, but that they're actually using a lot of value? So, for example, there was a EV company that I can't remember the name at the moment, which like yeah, that's the one. They surpassed the valuation of GM and also Ford.
They're not fuckery. And if you actually look at their fundamentals and all that, they're garbage. But you can. If it's a trade, you could be like, okay, I'm trading the psychology of the people. So, you don't the trade itself doesn't have to be these numbers line up. You can trade people's psychology. That's something that a lot of people did in crypto early days, which actually why when I was younger I really had a lot of fun trading crypto. Because for me, I really find how people think about their investment really interesting. So I traded a ton of crypto early on because it was really driven by people's psychology. So absolutely you can do that if you look at understand why people are behaving this way and you have some so you have to understand like you have some hypothesis you're confident in, about why people are behaving this way, sure, you can trade that. That's absolutely a thing, right? But on the other hand, you can be like, well, nothing to do with this. These underlying numbers don't make sense. There's traders that do both. Both can make money, both can lose money. Like one of the actually big misconceptions I hear a lot about like trading and investing is that people say, yeah, if you make money, someone else has to lose money. It's not true. You know, let's say I invest with a 2-week outlook and I make a bunch of money. So I was investing with a 20-year outlook. She also can make money. It's not a win-lose game. You can both lose. One of you can win, you can both win. There's so many variables to how people approach their trade, it doesn't matter. But actually, funnily enough, right now, in my portfolio, I have shares of some companies, and for example, I have Apple shares in my stock portfolio where their price, so the average price that they actually cost me, is negative. So it doesn't matter how much, what happens to Apple, I can, it can go bankrupt, I still will be net positive on that trade. So actually, since you seem to be interested, I'll expand a little bit. It's essentially a strategy to do with options. If you have a long-term investment, what you can do is if you have at least 100 shares or whatever divisible standard you have for options, you underwrite call options against the stuff you're holding. They pay you premium. As long as you pick the right strike price so it doesn't get hit, you can be collecting premium, which will lower your basis and take the years to money.
Wow, that's mad. You actually made that.
Yeah, quite a few now. Because I've been doing it for a long time now. Yeah.
He is saying that it's pretty cool and the rest of us didn't understand.
Right, I specifically explained this very confusing and it's very complicated, so that's why I kind of skipped over. If you really want, I can explain it, but it will take like 20 minutes to get through it. So yes, is that a no?
It looks like yes.
Okay, well, in that case, I need a marker. I really need a marker.
Okay, I'm gonna go and try to see.
Oh wait, do you have a, actually I can try using this.
Do you know how to
Do you
use
want some
it?
paper?
Yes, if I can get some paper and a pen.
I'll go and try to find the markers.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
One of my friends started having youth training, called trading for it.
Yeah.
So it's basically like you get like card, you get that app, and then on that app you could trade.
Mm-hmm.
What are your opinions about that? Because it seems quite easy, seeing it online shopping, which it's not. What are your suggestions about that?
I think Revolut's fine. There's like they're not great. This, yeah, great. Where's the map? Ah, perfect. So yeah, so Revolut is decent. There's some issues with them. No. Thank you. Ah, perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So as far as Revolut, I guess I'll sit down for this since I'll be drawing. But Revolut is decent. They have some issues as far as the way they treat their clients. So I wouldn't actually keep large amounts of money there because I wouldn't consider them like trustworthy as far as that. But as far as trading through them, if it's a long-term thing, they're fine. If it's a short-term, these chairs are horrible. If it's a short-term thing, their execution is routed through another broker who's doing very weird stuff with the routing, which doesn't get you the best price because you basically you get the trading for free, but that means you're kind of giving up something somewhere. You're fine with that. That's you can go ahead with that. If you're more in a position of I'm doing very quick trades or the entry price really matters to you, then Revolut wouldn't be a great choice. So I think a lot of brokers can be fine depending on what you want to do with them. But for example, what I just kind of mentioned, where I have negative basis price for Apple, you can never do that with Revolut because you need a more advanced broker that actually offers a lot of things. I'd say it still depends what you want to do as a beginner, right? Because even if you're like a very experienced trader, if all you're doing is a very long-term, just keep it in there trading, then a few extra cents per share won't really affect you. If you're looking at it, if you're very short-term and you're trying to do stuff actively, then that might affect you. And even, let's say another hand, if you're very long-term oriented, but you're doing stuff like I'm about to explain, then that could be kind of the opposite of it, where you can't do that really. So it really depends on what you're looking for, I would say. If you're new or experienced or anything like that, I would really say it depends what you're looking for. The reason I like to recommend interactive brokers is because they offer most of the things you could think of as a beginner. Even as like a seasoned beginner, which I would call like you've got 2 years of experience, you can still get everything you want there. So that's why I quite like to recommend them. But there's tons of brokerages which offer different kinds of things. So it's just about kind of finding what do you want to do, and then you can find kind of the right fit for you. And there's nothing that says that you can't go that today I'm going to use Revolut and tomorrow I'm opening up a new brokerage with someone else. I personally have several brokerage accounts with different brokers, just it's convenient. So for example, I already have, okay. I'll use this will be but thank you very much. But I have several brokerages, so there's no reason you can't just have several brokers and use Revolut for one type of trading, and then you use interactive brokers for different type of trading. I'd say you could definitely have both. But does that make sense? All right, great. Let's jump into okay. So top of the paper. So what we're talking about is called wheeling options. So it's quite interesting. Now, probably I'm going to start by explaining what options are. So as we talked about, you have some stock. Let's imagine let's say you have Apple, and then you have to own at least 100 shares of Apple, and you own them whatever basis price. That doesn't really matter. Now, what an option contract is there's two different types. You have options. Two different types. You have call options, and you have put options. It'll take a while till this starts to make sense. There's a lot of explaining for that. So what a call option is essentially the right to buy something. So if you're familiar with like lease agreements, it comes with an option to buy something. Like let's say you're leasing a car, sometimes you have an option to buy the car afterwards. If you're leasing some property, it typically comes with a right to extend it. So that's the option, right? And each of these is some kind of an option. It gives you the right to do something. Now there's two kinds of options. Actually, there's like 50 different kinds of options. And there's two main kinds of options, which are the European options and the American options. Just because we call them American and European does not mean that one of them is in Europe, the other one's in the US. There's tons of American options issued by European exchanges. There's tons of European options. Actually, not yet. There's plenty of European options offered by American exchanges. It's just a different type based on where they originated from. But in here, I'll focus on American options because those are the ones that are mainly used. So essentially, just to kind of explain what a call and put is let's draw kind of a small chart. Right. Say here, just so I can kind of explain it through the price. So any options contract comes with a few values that you have to pick. First one is the strike price. And the other one is like the expiration date. Now, what a strike price is the price at which the contract will be executed. So if you have an Apple option, I'm not going to say which one, just generally, then it will execute at the strike price. And what execute means, we'll get to that, but I'm just trying to, it's important, the strike price is kind of a pre-agreed price that contract will execute. So let's just make that $400 for simplicity. And then the expiration date, when it comes to American options, is by when you have the right to exercise it. So let's say, what's the date today? 17? So let's say, today is 17. 21? Yeah, 21. So today's 17. So let's say if the expiration date was the 20th, then you have the right to exercise it within the next 3 days. Afterwards, you can. So typically, there's kind of set periods and then there's extra dates. Basically, when you're looking through options, you can figure it out, and there's different reasons why different ones exist and stuff like that. But let's pick, I don't know, 24th of December, 2021. Now, this would never happen because 24th is a national holiday, so that wouldn't get issued yet.
Is expiration date exercise your option?
It's the last day that you can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So by closing of that day is when you can exercise it. Now, there's also exotic options where this can change, but generally for the option that you'll be dealing with, the 24th would be the last day that you can exercise it. Now, what a call option is, so for a call, if you buy it, you have the right to then purchase. So it's the right to buy. And I'll explain how that works. And then a put is the right to sell. So if you have one call contract that's per these conditions, what that means is that you have the right to buy. So just the standard is it's at 100 shares. So you always, it's an option, if it's a standard one, it's always 400 shares. But so if you own one call contract, you have the right to buy 100 shares at the price of $400 before or on the date of the 24th of December. If it's a put contract, then you have the right to sell 100 shares at the price of $400 on or before 24th of December. That's a very simply put, that's what these are. Now, why would these exist? So essentially, there's many reasons people might use them, but because someone who issues this contract to you is taking on risk. Because what if Apple is at $700? Now they have to buy 100 Apple shares at $700 and sell them to you at $400. Right? So whoever sells you the contract is taking on a certain level of risk. So in finance, whenever someone is accepting risk, they have to get money for it. If you buy shares, let's me give a better example. If a bank gives you a loan, they charge the interest rate for the risk of you not paying them. If you have the options, it's the same thing. It's called a premium. That's what the actual price is. But basically, premium is what you pay in exchange, to have issued it for the cost of actually being able to have this. So the other party who issues these will get that premium and receive it. So that's what you pay for the option contract. There's a lot of ways to use options contract. I'm not going to get into those, but I'm just going to talk about the wheeling part because that's what you guys were interested in. But generally, if you look at like Wall Street bets, when you see people losing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars or making hundreds of thousands or millions of whatever dollars, most of them are using options because they have much more risk, right? For every dollar a share price moves, an option can move like several $100s, right? So, and why can it move several hundred? Because essentially, let's say the current price is $500. Well, then 500, the strike price is 400. So you can buy 100 shares of Apple at $400. So what you would do is you would exercise the option. You would spend $40,000, and you can then sell it at $50,000, instantly making $10,000 of profit, right? So by small amounts, by small moves, you can make quite a bit of money with options. They're risky. I don't recommend this is how you use them unless you kind of balance the risk with them and etc. But this is why options are kind of used to make a lot of money. Now the thing I talked about, the wheeling options, essentially there's 3 steps to this of what you do. Now we start by, let's again just take Apple, and you believe that you want to buy Apple. That's part of your investment strategy. So what you start with is, let's say Apple is right here. This is the price of Apple today. And if you can, let's just kind of quickly go back. A put is the right to sell if you buy. But what if you sold a put, right? The thing is, I haven't mentioned yet, that with options, you're allowed to be the one who underwrites them. Underwriting them essentially means that you're the one on the other side. So if someone buys it, then you're the one who has to kind of exercise that option for them. So, sell the shares, buy the shares from them or sell to them. So what you can do if you're right here and you want to enter that Apple position, you can sell a put contract, accept that risk, and you can sell it, typically you would sell it at slightly below, right? So you're getting, wait, yeah, so yeah, you buy kind of below that price, and you sell your first put right here. And let's say you get paid $60 for that. You made $60 by selling this put. Then the price will continue, let's say it goes up a little bit, kind of goes flat. But your put never got hit, and this is the expiration one. So your put never got hit, so you get to pocket the $60, but you don't have to spend anything else. So you still want to go into Apple, so you go back at price number 2, just a little bit higher, because let's say now you really want them to get exercised. So you get paid like $90, let's say now. And the price, this is the expiration number 2. Now, if you have any questions, shout them out because I'm maybe looking at the paper, so I might not notice the raised hand. If you have any questions, shout them at me. And now the price gets hit, and the person exercises it. So you get to, so hold on, let me just assign prices. So number 1 was $400. Number 2 was $450, right? So it gets exercised at $450 for 450 times 100 shares. But you already got paid $60 and $90. So when you're calculating your basis price, $45,000 minus 6,000 and minus 9,000. So you end up already having a lower price. You're instantly in a profit. Now let's say you still want to hold Apple long term because you think it will go up. Well, you can start selling call options. So if you're selling a call option, you're giving someone else the right to buy your shares. So you pick some strike price well above. Say this is your strike price number 3. It says it's $600. So if someone exercises it, you'll get paid $60,000, which when you account for your basis price, you made a bunch of profit. But realistically, if you want to hold this long term, you're looking to collect the premium. You don't care about actually selling it. So you end up you get another bit of premium. Let's say this is very far from the price because you really don't want to sell it, so you get another $30 per share. And it continues, then this was the expiration, so it didn't get hit. And you continue to repeat this as you get more and more money into here, where eventually the basis price per share ends up being 0 or negative, or even very negative. So that's how this works. It's a little confusing, and it's a little advanced. I don't recommend doing this unless you've already played around with options and understand them and understand what alpha is, gamma is, what all these Greek letters mean. But this is the cool thing that you can do with you playing around with options and things like that. Just put it back. So anyone have any questions around that, or does that make sense? You seem very happy.
That's insane. Yeah. Have you ever had it where it like hits on one leg for the first time? Like let's say you got an option.
Yeah.
And you're not expecting it for the first time.
Yeah, that happens. But if you get the math right, you'll still end up in profit even if it happens. Because you can, that's one of the things we're actually building with the hedge fund for the retail space. We never got finishing it, we have to do the other stuff. Essentially, it would calculate the premium that you want per the kind of share you want if it gets hit. And you can actually, there's a way you can arbitrage it to literally make free money. There's minimal risk. If the risk was if the price was too much into something, it doesn't matter. Or you can there's also kind of equations you can put together, something you can easily figure out yourself based on what you're looking for, where the premium will cover the spread if it gets hit, and you end up making profit anyway. So sometimes, let's say I really want to enter General Motors, right? I really want to enter them tomorrow. I can put the put where it's already in the money, so it will get exercised, and I can use the premium to still keep the profit. There's a lot of ways you can play around with this. You can do crazy stuff. This is why I don't recommend getting into it unless you know what you're doing. There's a really good textbook though. It's typically used for grad school, but it's called it's like financial mathematics something. I'll also include it in the post on LinkedIn. But essentially, it focuses really heavily on the math around derivatives and different things, and that can kind of really give you a sense of how to work with these things in pretty fun ways. So that if you're like advanced, then I recommend that next one. It's pretty fun. Any more questions? Or have I boomed everybody and they want to go on that? Yeah. Oh, no, so that's what we worked on now. So now we're building, so fair, you came in late.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So we're doing it fair. There's two parts to the business, the education side and the brokerage side. On the education side, we're essentially building a free applied financial education platform. If you just look at hellofair.io, you can kind of have a little bit more of a look at what we do. And then on the brokerage side, we're essentially ESG-minded brokering. Right now, a lot of the kind of focuses we have is a lot of university students, things like that. On the hedge fund side, though, since you were asking about that, we did actually look into that. A lot of it, what we were focused on, were basically wealth management and stuff like that. We do also have podcasts, so we actually talked about some of this on one of the podcasts, and we also have podcasts going to the finance side. So one is called Irrational Expectations. That's more the finance one, so if anyone wants to kind of learn a little bit around it, discuss some kind of news and articles, so especially how you mentioned looking at articles, trying to understand that, we do that a lot with the Irrational Expectations one. And if you're interested in the business side of it, there's also one called Quantum, so I'll write that up because I spelled it in a weird way, and now it confuses everyone. This is why you need a knife. It would be so much simpler with that. There we go. So Irrational Expectations is one of them, and I guarantee I've just misspelled it because I don't remember names of books. I don't know how to spell things. As you can see, very much qualified to be running a company. So this is the finance one, and this is the Quantum. So Quan, number 2M, which is the more I talk about like business, their insights of the actual company. We actually even we try to be very transparent. So like when we work on our financial models for the business and stuff like that, we just live through the online. So like we show almost everything internally. All right. In that case, let's wrap it up. You want to end it up?
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for both of our speakers. Thank you very much for all of you that come. We very much appreciate it. If you have any more questions or anything like that that you don't feel comfortable asking around in here or something, we have the room booked for a little bit longer, so I'm sure Allison, I'm not sure if you can as well, stay behind and you can just network with them or you can talk to each other or anything like that. Be sure to stay and hang out in the room if you want to. You can. But otherwise, thank you very much and thank you to both of our speakers.
Oh yeah, and just one thing, if any of you want to talk to me or anything like that, find me on LinkedIn or anywhere. I think the program has my name spelled in there. You can have a meeting or anything, so feel free to just hit me up if you've got to run that. I hope you have a nice lunch. And speaking of, we should go for lunch after. Huh? Well, no, like the free money is in exchange for risk. You take on risk, you get money.
But like, holy crap. How is it to wrap your head around that sort of stuff at the first?
I don't remember how long. I just kind of remember because I got into the trading stuff and that. Oh yeah, sorry.
No.
But there was a point of I don't know how to finish it. I'll just leave it. Hold on, let me just stop the live stream. I just realized I left that running.
Also, you were very, I was really impressed.